Die Spitze des Eisbergs, nur so viel soll zu sehen sein, heißt es in einer Geschichte von Zsófia Bán. Diesem Satz scheinen ihre Erzählungen in den Bänden Abendschule und Als nur die Tiere lebten, als einem Formprinzip zu folgen. Der Blick fällt auf ein Detail und ein Abgrund tut sich auf. Bevor du angefangen hast, literarisch zu schreiben, hast du eine Menge erlebt und erforscht als Amerikanistin, als im Jahr 1 nach der ungarischen Revolution 56 in Rio de Janeiro geboren, mehrsprachig aufgewachsen, mit 11 in das depressive, repressive Kader Ungarn zurückgekommen, arbeitend als Ausstellungskuratorin, als Filmproduzentin, als Essayistin und Kritikerin. Und jetzt sitzt du hier in Berlin als Gast des DAAD Künstlerprogramms. Wir sind in deiner Wohnung und die erste Frage, die ich dir stellen möchte, ist: Was ist deine fruchtbarste Erfahrung, hier in Berlin zu sein?
Fruchtbarste.
Fruchtbar. Fruitful, yeah. Most productive experience to be.
Well, the most productive experience, I guess, is partly the context of the city itself, which throughout the years has basically become a second home for Hungarian writers. From the 70s onwards, or maybe even the end of the 60s, there was always a steady flow of Hungarian writers coming to Berlin, and this has actually made its way into the writing of all those authors who have been here, and I think that's true for me as well. Not necessarily in a thematic way, but certainly from the point of view of inspiration and of somehow bringing together or tying together our two histories, which is also a common history and a common culture. But at the same time, of course, it's also very different. So the familiarity is there, but the difference is also there. And the spark that's created by these two coming together is what goes into my writing, as I think it's true for many other of my colleagues.
Es waren tatsächlich Autoren da, die jüdische Themen bearbeitet haben und für die Berlin natürlich ein ganz besonderer Ort ist. Sie waren vor dem Mauerfall hier, Kertész war nach dem Mauerfall hier und die Erinnerungen an die deutsche Geschichte und an die ungarische Geschichte, ihre Verquickung ist extrem traumatisch. Ist das für dich auch so? Ist Berlin für dich auch dieser Ort, von dem aus die Shoah begann?
No, actually, for me, if I think about Hungarian history, the Hungarian Shoah, the part of the Shoah that's linked to Hungary, started in Hungary and not in Germany. And I think that's very important to repeat again and again, because there has been, in fact, a very strong intention to falsify our history in that respect, and to pretend that it all started here and that it all started with the Germans invading Hungary. As a matter of fact, that's false. You know, it always starts with the history of your own country, of how certain ideas are received, how certain ideas are easily adopted, for instance, by the officials of a government and so on. It's a very serious problem that in Hungary this confrontation basically with our own history has not happened to this date. And I have to add as an important fact that Hungary is the only post-socialist country that has not to this date liberated the the dossiers of the secret police. And that in itself is a very symbolic fact, because it affects and poisons our everydays, I have to say.
Gibt es hier in Berlin in der Zeit deines Aufenthalts jetzt als DAAD-Stipendiatin Schriftsteller, Filmemacher, Fotografen, Künstler, mit denen du dich über diese Fragen auseinandersetzt?
As a matter of fact, some of these artists are also DAAD. They're part of the DAAD Künstlerprogramms. For instance, one of my neighbors here is a Vietnamese filmmaker, and of course, in a certain sense, we share a lot of experiences, even though obviously in a totally different cultural context and a totally different geographical context. But both of our countries are, in fact, post-communist countries. And as a matter of fact, in Vietnam nowadays, the thought control and censorship is still happening on a daily basis. And I could mention many other artists as well.
Nun gehörst du ja zu den wirklich sehr wenigen ungarischen Autoren, die nicht vorwiegend über Ungarn schreiben. Also du gehörst doch zu denjenigen, die eigentlich in einen viel größeren sprachlichen und kulturellen Kontext hineinschreiben und auch aus ihm herauskommen. Deine Geschichten spielen in Lateinamerika oder in den Vereinigten Staaten oder irgendwo in Europa. Aber du hast nicht vor allem ungarische Themen. Bedeutet das der Aufenthalt in Berlin jetzt, dass du diesen Weg weitergehst, dass du noch mehr, ein noch größeres, globalisiertes Geschöpf wirst durch den Kontakt mit amerikanischen, vietnamesischen, französischen Fellows hier in Berlin?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a very important chance to be able to meet with them. But you know, even though I don't necessarily write about Hungarian, so-called Hungarian topics, whatever that may be, but I still write in Hungarian, and I think in Hungarian. And when I write about other geographical contexts or other cultures or characters who are embedded in other cultures, I still write about those things from a Hungarian perspective. And I think that's primarily what makes a writer what he or she is, and not necessarily the actual topics that appear in one's writing. Even though, you know, in the world of literature, it's a more easy way to, you know, to think of writers who represent their own country, also from a thematic point of view. But I think a writer represents his or her culture primarily from the point of view of how he or she uses language. And, yeah.
Nun ist deine Sprache aber ein Instrument geworden, mit dem sehr viel nicht-ungarische Literatur, Kunst, Theorie berührt wird wie mit einem Zauberstab. Und vor allem, das ist jetzt meine nächste Frage, du bist Amerikanistin, unterrichtest an der Universität in Budapest Amerikanistik und bist sehr viel in den Vereinigten Staaten gewesen. Was sind deine wichtigsten Erfahrungen, die du dort gemacht hast und die deine Arbeit in der ungarischen Sprache prägen?
Well, I guess the most important idea or experience that basically almost anyone, not just an artist, but basically anyone who goes to the United States is able to have is the idea of openness, is the idea of collecting or gathering differences to produce something new out of those multiplicities and differences. And the basic experience is usually a kind of sense of freedom, that you don't feel enclosed in the expectations of your own culture, which you often do when you're at home. And of course this is often very liberating also, in the sense that American literature has been very rich in bringing to the foreground woman writers among other so-called minorities, because of course from a power point of view at least, they are a minority. They offer really a kind of freedom from those constraints that you usually have at home.
Gibt es für dich in der Literatur eine Art von symbolischer Mutter? Ein Vorbild oder eine symbolische Mutter in diesem Sinne der italienischen Frauenbewegung vor vielen Jahren, als es hieß, es gibt für das weibliche Schreiben keine Tradition wie für das männliche. Gibt es weibliche Autorinnen, die für dich in eine solche Tradition gehören, die dich ermutigen?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because in fact, since you're talking about mother, for the generations of literary mothers, there are in fact very few in Hungarian literature, since we're talking about that. There are a few that I could refer to, for instance, Kafka Margit or Lesnai Anna, and a few others who have been having a kind of comeback in contemporary Hungarian literature, precisely because of all these new women writers who have made their appearance in the literary scene. You know, there was this debate once on whether there is such a thing as women's literature, which is, you know, it's kind of strange that we're still talking about this question in 2015, 16, and you know, we should be way beyond that now. But we still go on discussing these things, and when I said that it's you know, it's very important for instance, women figures to be represented by women, simply because they have a totally different perspective and a totally different experience of what it is to be a woman. And then the answer from a male critic came that you know, there are all those really wonderful women figures in literature written by men. So why do you think there is a kind of vacuum there, when there are, in fact, you know, all those wonderful figures? And it's simply not an idea that I think has gone into general thinking, that the general discourse of literature, if you will, that it is important, in fact, to have that other experience and that other perspective represented by the other gender, or by the other in any sense of the word. And I think that's a very, very sensitive question nowadays, not only from the point of view of art, but also from the point of view of politics. Because, you know, this whole concept of the importance of the other, of the acceptance of the other, is something that is still very, very strongly missing from general discourse. And now I'm especially referring to political discourse, to contemporary politics in Hungary. And of course, the most symbolic political gesture in connection with that has been the raising of the fence on the southern border, which is basically a second Iron Curtain, if you will.
Diese Politik musst du ja als direkte Feinderklärung gegen dich auch als Person empfinden. Wie verhältst du dich dazu als Schriftstellerin? Denkst du an Emigration oder denkst du daran, in Ungarn mit deinen Mitteln als Autorin, als Essayistin, als Kolumnistin, als Professorin Widerstand zu leisten?
Well, that's always a difficult question, you know, because it's always a question of proportions, of how far, you know, a regime goes in trying to silence anyone who thinks differently. But obviously, I think that for a writer, it's fundamentally important to stay within the language. You know, it's always a heartbreaking decision when a writer, any writer from anywhere for that matter, to have to change their language or simply their cultural context, because of course not all writers are in fact able to start writing in another language. If you take away language from a writer, you're basically taking away the, I don't know, the oxygen tank.
Gibt es in Ungarn heute, würdest du sagen, es gibt Zensur im öffentlich-rechtlichen Rundfunk, in den Printmedien, im Internet?
Well, you know, censorship is something that evolves with time. It changes in form. And I think that nowadays, as opposed to under the communist regime, where actual texts were being censored and actual paragraphs and sentences were being cut from texts, nowadays censorship comes primarily in the form of non-funding, and just most recently, the part of funding for journals and magazines where most of contemporary Hungarian literature is published has been cut to an enormous extent. This results in most of these journals and magazines having to close down. And I don't know where it's going to lead to. I mean, it's very disturbing and scary.
Wenn du zurückgehen musst nach Ungarn, was würdest du am liebsten mitnehmen aus Berlin? Also eine Kulturinstitution oder eine Sehenswürdigkeit?
I think perhaps what comes most readily to mind is not really an institution, but of course it's helped by all kinds of institutions, which is the incredible German audience. You don't have that anywhere else in the world, that absolutely incredible attention that comes from a German audience that you can sense during readings, and the openness to the idea that literature is important.